Um, I put up an image that, for those who know my work, would know me for this work. But because here at the fair, I have a solo show focused on my works from the 80s, I thought that it would be interesting to do something different, to actually talk about the works that are here and a little bit of the context in which these works were made, and show a few other things that are not on view here. You may know that here at the fair, I have a solo show with England and Company, and the show is curated by Rolando Carmona, who is a Paris-based curator. So Rolando selected a series of works from the 80s representative of different directions that I took throughout the 80s. And in the exhibition, we have works that represent the different phases going back to 1980, 81, and 82. So I have lived half of my life in Rio and the other half in Chicago. And I started my career in 1980 in Brazil, in Rio. And for those of you who know a little bit about Brazilian history, you would know that conditions were very particular at the time. We were still under a military dictatorship. Inflation exceeded 100%. And there was a great deal of uncertainty about the future. There was turmoil. The government and the extreme right wing of the government secretly sponsored attacks on civilian infrastructures. So, for example, the National Lawyers Association received not only bomb threats, but actual bombs that killed people because they defended those who articulated organizations and mobilized public opinion in favor of democracy. There were arsons, there were all kinds of attacks during this period, 80, 81, 82. And it was a very particular political climate. So together with other poets and writers from São Paulo, some of the names may be familiar to you. Udinilson Jr., who died recently and has been receiving a lot of attention lately. Glauco Matoso is another well-known name in São Paulo. Teresa Jardim, who was the daughter of Reinaldo Jardim, one of the founders of the neo-concrete movement. So all of us, we formed a group, and we launched, I'm going to say the name, but it's not what you're going to think initially. We launched the Porn Art Movement as a form of political resistance and as a form of developing alternative ways to do body politics in an imaginative, liberating manner. Today, when you say this, when you say porn art, especially for the younger generation, one says, oh yeah, of course, obviously. But in 1980, to take a word that was considered sublime, art, and join it with another word that was considered abject. Not only considered abject, but literally illegal. The text of the law in place, the Constitution, was still from the 30s. It was illegal to produce pornography, it was illegal to possess pornography, it was illegal to do anything public with it. So, but we are not interested in conventional pornography. We wanted to subvert the language of pornography and use it as a form of political resistance, and use it as a form of developing an imaginative language. Almost 10 years later, for example, Jeff Koons would revisit the idea, but do it in a very conventional way. We were doing under a military regime, and because the military regime had suppressed public space, one of the things that we did was to redevelop a sense of public space. So every Friday night, we had a performance for 2 years in a row. The movement lasted from 1980 to 82. Every Friday night, we had a performance in the very center of Rio de Janeiro. If you know Rio, it was at Cinelândia. And we also did a lot of public events in other locations. We published zines. We used the Mail Art Network. So I'm going to show you here a video of the very last organized public event that we did on Ipanema Beach in 1982. It runs for about 4 minutes or so.
Masturbação literária não gera porra nenhuma. Solenemente e prega a suruba literária.
Vejo que uma grande pica incandescente se ergue em direção à buceta da terra. É o princípio de uma nova era. Nela se entenderão as coisas boas da vida, em todos os sentidos. A palavra sacanagem não será mais indecente. E a poesia então se fará necessária, como nunca o foi em toda a história. Vá se fuder, disse um ao outro.
Vá se fuder, disse o outro ao um.
Descobriram a felicidade
Em seu lugar comum.
Ei, que tal de depois de chupar o meu pau e comer o mingau, usar o pentelho como fio dental?
Morava no reino da bunda, onde a bunda abundava. Certa vez, a pica picou a bunda, e desde então viverão felizes para sempre.
Amanhã, vocal, oral.
Existe a sessão de uma puta.
Vocal, oral, social.
Estava escrito na camisinha.
Pra curar amor platônico, só uma trepada homérica.
Por quê? Maravilha. Mas vocês sabem.
I spent 8 years looking for this film. And after a lot of effort, I finally discovered it, abandoned in a corner somewhere. And it's interesting to point out that not only nudity was illegal at the time, but it still is today. European tourists routinely are arrested in Ipanema and Copacabana because they just drop their shorts and everything else and get naked on the beach, and everybody, now they have cell phones, so they call the police on their cell phone. Before they had to go out and find a phone. But routinely, people are arrested on the beach for that, but especially at that time. So this gives you a sense of the context with the political demonstration on the beach of the environment in which some of these works that are on view here were produced. So I thought I would then proceed to comment on some of the works that are on display. And the movement ended in 1982, and I started to work with new media. But within that context, this is a piece created on a typewriter, and it's called Political Position from 1981. It has, in a sense, the verticality of a public monument, but obviously switches the conversation from political parties to, let's say, an after-beach party, that is, to the domain of private life. Because under a military dictatorship, if you are not able to mobilize society through to parties, to political parties, and you're not able to develop mass movements, you have to begin change where you can, which is your own life, around you. So this work, which in Portuguese is Frente de Liberação de Trás. In Spanish, you might say Frente de Liberación de Atrás. In English, Behind the Liberation Front. And it's also done on a typewriter. There are many layers here, but one of the things that traditional pornography reproduces power relations that we find in society. It objectifies individuals, destitutes them from their humanity, and eliminates any kind of ambiguity. It basically separates people within very specific genres and codes. It has no joy, it has no humor, it has none of the emotions that a true relationship has. So in this case, we don't know if we're looking at two gentlemen, two ladies, a gentleman and a lady. There is a level of playfulness and ambiguity that completely contradicts the genre coding of conventional pornography. There are a few other elements because I use letters here, and if you get close to the work, there are other things that you can read in the work by actually looking at the letters themselves.